Let's see here.
Looks like it's going on my end.
Alrighty. So good afternoon. This is David Perlman
Heather Cox.
and today is August 20th, almost time for fall. This is MS Office Hours, and today with us we will have Jason Krolak and I believe Justin Snyder. If I didn't mix that up, from Core BTS, we'll be talking about Power Automate and Teams. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Jason and team, and we'll go from there.
So just quick introduction. My name is Jason Krolak, Microsoft Technical Account Manager with Core BTS. For those of you unaware, the 30-second commercial is we are a Microsoft Gold Partner, 16 current competencies, 100 engineers on our Microsoft bench, all specialized in all things Azure, modern work, and change management, governance, and adoption. And today, speaking on behalf of Core BTS will be Justin Snyder, who is our Senior Solutions Architect with our Microsoft Collaborations Platform Division. And I will turn it over to Justin.
Perfect. Thanks, Jason, and nice to meet everyone for the first time. Excited to be talking with you all today. As mentioned, we will be talking about Power Automate in Microsoft Teams when it comes to the EDU space. Right here, you see the agenda that I'll be talking through. Obviously, going through an intro, a little bit about myself. I did say Justin Snyder. I actually live in the Pittsburgh area, and born and raised, honestly, in the Pittsburgh area, but that's where I reside. But like I said, do work for Core BTS, who's a national partner with Microsoft. Today we'll be talking about a couple of things. We'll take a little short pit stop and just talk about overall Teams for EDU and as well as Power Automate for EDU and really what those two products are. If you're not familiar, I assume a lot of you are, obviously, but we'll talk about those two as a product and as products and what they can do. From there, I'll talk about really integrating those two together and how they can help within the education space, accelerate and enable and enrich that experience, not only for your educators and your staff, but most importantly, students, and how you can really make that experience better, especially in a scenario where we're all remote learning or those students are remote learning. And then from there, we'll actually touch on a couple of really creative use cases that we've seen within the customers that we're working with, leveraging Power Automate in Microsoft Teams for EDU to solve some creative challenges, automate some process, and really, again, just enrich that experience for everyone involved in EDU. So real quick, like I said, we'll take a little pit stop or a little checkpoint around just Microsoft Teams and Power Automate overall. Microsoft Teams, we all know it. We're all participating in a Microsoft Teams call right now. But if you aren't aware, there is what's called Microsoft Teams for Education, sort of a version of Microsoft Teams that is really purpose-built for the education space. A lot of really core features to the education experience are around this ability to have teams that are specific to classrooms, to have teams that are specific to not just classrooms in Microsoft Teams, whether that be through staff teams or professional learning centers or just overall everything that is specific to that education industry. When you have a team that's necessarily for the education space, you get a lot of useful features around the ability for, like we've seen in Teams normally, the ability to chat, to manage files, to have the class notebook. Heather and the team actually showed you some new features and updates that are coming for Notebook within Microsoft Teams available to your teams and your classrooms, really within the education space. The ability to take meetings that you have and translate automatic teachings directly to users' one notebook, which honestly, thinking back to the days when I was a student, would save me so much time. But a lot of these features that are really built into Microsoft Teams focused on education. We have assignments and grades and the ability to manage those different things, all built into the normal, I would say normal in terms of the standard Teams interface, but again, targeted towards that education space. We also have the Power Platform. Power Platform necessarily isn't specifically in any way built for the education space. But what we found is that the Power Platform, because of its nature of being a low-code platform, is one that really can be adopted in the education space because you don't necessarily have to be a full-verse developer to or really understand all of the pieces of the puzzle to put together really effective, valuable solutions that can automate some of your pieces in your life, whether that be from an administration perspective or an educator perspective or a student's perspective. The entire Power Platform can help enable that. More specifically, though, Power Automate is a tool that we see within the education space getting the most traction. Power Automate, really, a lot of things within the education space are process. Whether that be through at the smallest micro level for a classroom, whether that be through assignments or getting approvals through capstone projects for thesi, which we'll actually talk about in a little bit. A lot of education is transactional or process oriented. So we found that Power Automate is really taken on when it comes to the education space. Specifically in Microsoft Team or within Power Automate, we're able to do a lot of different things. I kind of touched on this. It really can be for all those different demographics when we talk about users within your environment. First and foremost, end users. It is a low-code solution. These really will target power users, but really anyone can build quick, really flows or processes that just really shorten their time to do things, or automate a little piece of their day, or automate a process. But Power Automate isn't just for end users, right? It can be for IT pros and it can be for developers, both on its out-of-the-box version where you can configure it to really do some creative things, which we'll talk about, but even extended it above that. Everything within, I mean, honestly, everything in Microsoft these days has a really, I would say, robust extensibility platform, and Power Automate is no exception to that. Any experienced developers can leverage custom connectors, HTTP actions, calling custom APIs, so that they can still get that flexibility that they, a lot of them like when they build full-scale applications or what have you. So again, Power Automate, even within the education space, is still really designed for everyone in mind. Within Power Automate, we're able to do a lot of, I would say, valuable and efficient things. I mentioned that in the EDU space, a lot of things are transactional, a lot of things are process oriented, and Power Automate can help sort of enrich that. One of the most common things when you think about Power Automate is the ability to go through approval processes, be able to send approvals, be able to send notifications, and be able to send those in ways that don't necessarily take the end user out of their comfortable experience. A lot of times, if you worked with like workflow platforms in the past, if something happens, you have to be embedded with that platform to be able to participate in that process. But with Power Automate and Microsoft Teams, which we'll talk about in a little bit, that isn't required. You can build out processes and you can build out these flows that do the work and do the process, but then surface in ways that are comfortable or intuitive to the user. You can have your approvals be all through Teams. You can have approvals go through email so it can be one click. Things that we couldn't necessarily say in the past are now capable with the tools that we have in Power Automate in Microsoft Teams. Overall, when we talk about Power Automate, we have a lot of different flexible features that sort of make not only the consumption of these flows or Power Automates valuable, but also the development and the build of these Power Automates and flows together. So overall, like using a lot of different connectors available in the platform. For example, SharePoint list, you're able to use as a data storage or document storage, or leverage it as a source or a destination for content or processing. You're able to actually build out your structure of your flows from a business process perspective within Visio. I would say that this is a feature that isn't really adopted as much, but I've used personally. And for me, it's really valuable in the sense of when I'm working with customers, being able to pull it out of the technology that is Flow and really talk about the business process. And that's a little bit easier when you're sort of architecting that with a customer in Visio. We're able to then build processes or bots. Think of Power Virtual Agents or AI Builder within Power Automate, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Being able to add intelligence to that experience so that not only do you have to know your insights or information, you can get that insights generated by a computer, which obviously a lot of times will be able to pull that together faster than any other human. Mentioned the ability to have adaptive cards, communication of those approvals, not necessarily just in Flow or Power Automate, but given directly to the user through emails, Teams notifications, push notifications. The ability to go through that approval process and trigger that from anything is really the crux of a lot of things that you can do in Power Automate. Now, when we talk about the notification part, when we think of Microsoft Teams for EDU, this is really what I would say is one of the most common ways to interface with process in Microsoft Teams for EDU when we talk about Power Automate. And that's because, again, Microsoft Teams for EDU. Thank you. Microsoft Teams for EDU is built purposely so your students, your teachers, your educators, your administrators are going to be embedded in this platform already. So being able to bring the process to them here is super valuable. As you can see on the screen, the app for Flow in Microsoft Teams is super useful. It really looks a lot like Flow in the browser and working with that, and that experience is consistent for a reason. It's designed to be like that for a reason, but you can see that you can see all of your flows that you have. You have a tab specifically for any approvals that you have. So again, a centralized place for that if you're managing many processes or many flows and you need to manage approvals at one place, you don't have to leave Teams to do that. You can see here as examples on the left that is pretty simple. The card that you would see in an email to process an approval in Microsoft Teams or in an email is the same that it would show in a card in Microsoft Teams. So again, that consistent experience, but then provided directly to the user. Approvals, I kind of talked about this a little bit already, so I won't spend too much on this slide, but approvals can have many different flavors, right? You can have approvals that are truly an approval in nature. You can have approvals that are more process drivers. You can have approvals that are really for legality sense and need to be signed or what have you. And Power Automate out of the box already has a lot of those features, and then additionally all of those actions that are available to you, you can configure in your own way. And again, in the EDU space, like I mentioned, process and transactions and approvals are really baked into education right now. I would say not only at the higher level education, but even at secondary and primary education. Think of the relationship between teachers and parents, and the ability to engage parents, whether that are outside of the domain, and able to process things in that capacity, all can be empowered by using approvals within Power Automate. So from there, we also have what's called AI Builder. AI Builder for us has actually brought a lot of value to what we can provide to customers, not just the EDU market, but overall. AI Builder allows you to get really valuable insights or predictions or just metadata about context and documents and information and process that can help not only help educators and administrators keep track of information and help support students, but also provide insights that enrich that experience going forward. And we'll talk, like I said, I'll talk about AI Builder and actually two of the use cases that I have and how it's helped us solve different challenges for customers in ways that necessarily a human couldn't do too feasibly. And then finally, I mentioned not only do you have approvals and do you have AI Builder, but the really big thing when it comes to Power Automate, and I would say even specifically for the EDU space, is that there's an extensibility framework to expand upon what you can do out of the box in Power Automate. There aren't necessarily a lot of connectors out there that are already built for the education space, but you can build them. There isn't necessarily connections, and we'll talk about SDS and how that can support that with school information systems, but there's not necessarily any pre-built connectors in there for Power Automate for those school information systems. So but you still have that capability, whether it's working directly through REST calls and using the HTTP actions, or it's actually building out a full connector for that connection. So from here, I actually want to talk about a couple of use cases that we've seen with customers, we've worked with customers, or we've ideated with customers on. As I mentioned, these will incorporate not just Power Automate, but they'll incorporate a lot of different things. I mentioned School Data Sync, I mentioned AI Builder, which still is Power Automate, but really a lot of things in the Office 365 stack that sort of make these things possible. So in the first example, we can enhance the review process. And I say review process pretty agnostic because there's, like I mentioned, there's a lot of different review processes that exist in education. For example, in higher education, a lot of universities manage professor evaluations, reviewing professors. We also have the ability within higher or lower education, if you're working on group projects or you're working on different pieces of the puzzle there, peer reviews. Being able to not only engage the relationship between the teacher and the student right now, it not only is that challenging, it's also challenging for us to engage students with each other. And being able to do that and I'll enable the ability for students to not only engage each other, but help support each other through remote schooling or however that's sort of supported in the different education spaces. That's super important. And what you see here is an example of how we can enable that, or we can enable that overall review processes when it comes to the education space. So what you see here in the bottom, I'll call it actually really quickly. Again, Heather and team, you sort of mentioned School Data Sync already, but in this example, you can leverage Microsoft School Data Sync to really be the sort of the driver for generating the different teams and different classrooms and different setup you have for your organization. Obviously, all of that pulling from an assorted different school information systems, whether that be what's on here for Infinite Campus, GradeWorks, or what have you. Not only is there out-of-the-box support for those and many more, there's also different ways that you can tie into other school information systems to pull out class rosters, to pull out class details, to generate Microsoft Teams or SharePoint sites or do Microsoft Intune device management. Microsoft School Data Sync really enables that and honestly, from our perspective, accelerates that. That's a big thing with this is that if you were to do this sort of without School Data Sync, you're going to be creating and provisioning a lot of these on your own, and you're going to be responsible for planning that out. School Data Sync, you still have to plan it, but it sort of can be that framework that we use to generate classrooms and et cetera. With that, we have a team. We have a team that's for a class. I'll take the professor review or the professor evaluation use case as an example. We have that class, and that class has a private channel that maybe is for reviews or feedback for the professor. And that feedback maybe has a form that's embedded in the Microsoft team that students can provide their feedback and go through a typical review for the professor that then sent through a Microsoft Flow or Power Automate. And that obviously goes into Excel sheet and is a lot of really valuable data. And we can review that manually. But what we also can do is use something like AI Builder to feed that content or that information through sentiment analysis. So you can get not only real direct feedback from the text, but you can get some insights from, okay, of the feedback that students are providing, what is the sentiment overall? And that can be generated not by a person, but that can actually be generated based off the context of the reviews. And we can easily see, okay, based off of this, we know how a professor's performing. We can track trends on that professor's performance. This can also not even be, like I said, for professor evaluations. This is also can be for peer reviews. We can track and see how overall our students and educators are doing in engaging with each other, especially in a time like now. From there, we can see if we have sort of a timetable for when professor evaluations need to be done, or we have sort of a trigger that enables that, okay, all of our evaluations been done. We can send notifications that, hey, your evaluation has been completed, and the results from your students have been submitted, and we have your sentiment analysis, and we can really understand not only what is the feedback from students, but what the feedback means from the students. And that for us has been super helpful with some education institutions, because there's a lot of opinions when you have students in an institution, right? You have sometimes dozens of students, but even sometimes thousands of students that see multiple professors across the industry, and being able to provide that feedback is super important for them.
So Justin, just a couple quick questions. I know we have about six minutes left. So pretty broad audience here. Do you start with the use case and then look at the tool, or do you look at the tool and then try to find the use case?
Great question. So when we look at this, especially at Core BTS and everything we do, we try to be technology agnostic. So whether that be how you want to automate your process or how you want to store your data, we look at the business need. And then from our experience, we say, okay, these are the business needs you have. These are the different ways you can achieve it. And actually, my next example sort of goes back to that and shows that for different pieces of the puzzle, you can use different things. So in this next process, and this is the second to last slide I have, so I think I should be able to finish up pretty quickly. We see that we can also enrich the capstone process. So this is one that I think is huge. It could be very valuable for higher education. The ability to, especially while we're all separated and we're all remote, we have students going through thesis and capstone projects where they have to get a bunch of tasks done. They have to submit they have to justify, and they have to defend their thesis, and they have to go through all these different things. And a lot of those are all done in person, and they're not necessarily able to be done that way now. So in this example, you can have tasks, checklists, or record keeping, and that could be in Teams or SharePoint, or maybe eventually Microsoft Lists. And then you can have the ability to submit, maybe you need to submit your thesis document, and that could be submitted through a form or Power Apps or Teams. We can look at the different ways depending on how your organization uses it. That goes through channeling for approvals, whether that be through your advisor pulling from Active Directory or anything like that. You can go through the normal approval channels, whether that be through approvals through Flow or notifications, push notifications. You can instantly, if a thesis is approved and someone's got that information back, they can be instantly notified, which is something that I think as a student, thinking back to when I went through school, that would be great, instantly knowing when my thesis was approved and everything was good. And then a lot of times there's some legality around that. So the ability to engage sort of actual signing through things like DocuSign is capable in Power Automate.
Awesome. So we have about a couple minutes left here, and I'd love to get some Q&A in, because I bet you there's going to be some. So you tell me when you have a natural break, or just adjust your speed accordingly. We got about 4.5 minutes left.
Got it. This is the last content slide, so I'll just summarize it real quick. Another thing you could do is, and this is something that admittedly we haven't done yet, but it's something that we've ideated with some customers on before, is actually registering either through the school information systems or however you're storing tests, getting that data, and then from there being able to use AI Builder and predictions to detect when a student might be starting to lag, or something might be dropping for a student, or taking a set of tests and identifying, hey, these are the types of topics that are in the test, and we noticed that in the previous test with these topics, students didn't do as well. With Power Automate, we can actually identify those predictions and then provide them to students and educators to maybe adapt a test or have another review session on a specific topic. So that's another way that you can take information from results or tests or information within your space, and then provide insights to your educators.
Awesome.
And that's all I had. So I'll take it next to Q&A.
Awesome. Well, hey, really appreciate you doing that. I think at some point, Jason and Justin, it might be interesting looking at one of these use cases, and maybe it's something we do once a lot of us on this phone have to get over the school bump. I'm sure you guys are busy as well, but maybe we take a particular use case, and then over a 2-week, 2 half-hour sessions, we actually show people how to build the flow, right? How to use Power Automate, how to use the API connectors. Could the community just kind of go into the chat channel real quick? Would that be interesting? So, I don't want to call it training, but I'll call it, a little deeper dive on how these tools work. Would that be helpful for folks? Okay, I'm getting a lot of yeses. All right.
I would love to do it.
I knew you say yes. Okay, so we're going to do that, I think, maybe, it doesn't have to be anything overly complicated. Would that be something, Justin, you'd be up for?
Most definitely.
All right, so we'll do like 2 back-to-back weeks on how to build a flow, how to connect the, how to use the API connectors, pick some standard process. I don't know, Teams creation, a workflow for approvals on, we don't want to have to get too complicated. Maybe a couple of data sources.
So
all right.
Go ahead,
sorry.
David, if it would be helpful, I could present one that we've been putting together for. It's for petition approvals, and it goes through a multi-stage approval process. And I could probably put something like that together and show off something that we've actually been doing.
All right, so I think here's what we're going to do. It sounds like Andy's going to show what it is the use case is, right? And then maybe we'll have Justin come back in, and we'll kind of over a week or two kind of not recreate that specific one, but maybe show people how to get started. And again, I want to stay away from the training, but just maybe a 200 level, maybe medium 300 level. I will reach out to you, Andy. Thanks for doing that. Appreciate it.
Yeah, again, and Justin can reach out to me directly if he wants to talk about some of the specifics of what we're doing. Andy at uh.edu.
Sounds good. Appreciate it.
Awesome. You are a winner, Andy, no matter what the basketball team does. Okay, so we had a question from Francisco, and then we're going to end this call. But how easy are these Power Automate processes or workflows for IT to support when these functions break or do not work as expected? What resources are available? Troubleshooting, fear of shadow IT?
Yeah, so that really is I would say a loaded question. I think it really depends on how complicated you make it. As I mentioned earlier, Flow and Power Automate can be leveraged at the end user level, but it also can be built and managed at the developer level. And if you're really building out, I would say, large scale complex flows or what have you, from our perspective, there's a lot of planning that has to go in place there to make sure that you're not coming back with issues, that you're not coming back with, oh, we forgot this one edge case and this one error. And for us, that's a lot of not only like the typical process, which is discovering requirements and design, but that's actually prototyping and then throwing that against the use case and validating that the things that we aren't catching or we aren't thinking about when designing are edge cases. So what I would say in terms of resources and availability and working on that, it's really being proactive. And by being proactive and making sure that you put things together, then you don't have issues where you come back not supporting edge cases or having errors like that, if that makes sense.
So it's always about control in IT versus kind of end user provisioning. So, if they create it to some degree, maybe you try to help them support that. But again, I think there's a pretty wide range. I think we had Matt Wade on back in, I don't know, June time frame, and they were doing some pretty advanced stuff around Power Automate. He was taking a slightly different look at it than this approach, but I know they spent a lot of time on planning as well. So on that note, if there's any questions left, maybe Jason, Justin, look in the channel. I don't Andy put in his email address in there, but I think we'll do that as a series. That way we can kind of do the, hey, here's how you construct it, and then here's kind of what we've done, or we'll reverse those. So that'll be a 2 or 3 week session, but we're spending more and more time in Power Automate. And again, don't listen if you haven't played with it. Heather and I don't play with this stuff every day, but a lot of these things are great. So really appreciate it, Core BTS team. Thanks, Jason. Thanks, Justin. Great session. I will stop recording, and I hope everybody has a wonderful evening, and we'll go from there. And this will be posted in the next